Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, the White House directs agencies to consider staff reductions in the event of a shutdown, and CISA alerts federal agencies of ongoing widespread attacks using Cisco 0 days. It's Monday, September 29th, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. And now let's dive into the day's top headlines. The White House's Office of Management and Budget is instructing agencies to consider reducing staff for programs that have a lapse in funding in the event of a government shutdown, as tensions rise ahead of the September 30th end of the fiscal year. In an undated message sent out last week, the White House said, quote, "With respect to those federal programs whose funding would lapse and which are otherwise unfunded, such programs are no longer statutorily required to be carried out," unquote. The guidance goes on to say that consistent with applicable law, including a federal reduction in force statute, agencies are directed to use this opportunity to consider RIF notices for employees working in projects, programs, or activities that have a funding lapse on October 1st, don't have another source of funding, and are not consistent with President Donald Trump's priorities. The project, program, or activity must meet all three criteria, the message said. The message also places blame for a possible shutdown squarely on congressional Democrats, calling their demands, quote, insane. The message also explains that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, legislation passed earlier this year that is at the heart of Trump's second-term agenda, provided, quote, ample resources to ensure that many core Trump administration priorities will continue uninterrupted, unquote. Democrats decried the message. In a written statement, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies, described the tactic as a likely illegal threat that would harm federal workers who don't have anything to do with the current policy disputes. And Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, similarly said in a written statement that, quote, this threat has nothing to do with keeping government open. It is just another strong-arm attempt from Donald Trump and his hatchet man, Russ Vought, to dismantle the government piece by piece, unquote. In other news, federal cyber authorities sounded a rare alarm last week, issuing an emergency directive about an ongoing and widespread attack spree involving actively exploited zero-day vulnerabilities affecting Cisco firewalls. Cisco said it began investigating attacks on multiple government agencies linked to the state-sponsored campaign in May. The vendor, which attributes the attacks to the same threat group behind an early 2024 campaign targeting Cisco devices that it dubbed Arcane Door, said the new 0 days were exploited to implant malware, execute commands, and potentially exfiltrate data from the compromised devices. Cisco disclosed 3 vulnerabilities affecting its adaptive security appliances. Those are CVE 2025-20333, CVE 2025-20363, and CVE 2025-20362, but said evidence collected strongly indicates that CVE 2025-20333 and CVE 2025-20362 were used by the attacker in the current attack campaign. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said those 2 0 days pose unacceptable risk to federal agencies and require immediate action. Federal agencies were required to hunt for evidence of compromise, report findings, and disconnect any compromised devices by the end of the day last Friday. Agencies running Cisco ASA firewalls are also required to apply Cisco's patches or permanently disconnect end-of-life devices. CISA Acting Director Madhu Gaudamakala said, quote, CISA is directing federal agencies to take immediate action due to the alarming ease with which a threat actor can exploit these vulnerabilities, maintain persistence on the device, and gain access to a victim's network, unquote. Cisco did not fully explain why it waited 4 months from its initial response to the attacks on federal agencies to disclose the malicious activity and patch the 0-day vulnerabilities. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Daily Scoop podcast, available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people to find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back tomorrow with more top headlines. Until then, I'm your host, as always, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.